The number of refugees, asylum seekers, and internally displaced people around the world has reached 65 million in 2016. Between January 2015 and July 2017, over 84,000 refugees were resettled to Canada. This refugee population included 43% of school-age youth. Currently, the focus is shifting from refugee students' resettlement to refugee students' well-being. Education can be a healing and empowering process for refugee children. However, teachers are saying they don't know how to respond to the needs of refugee students. To find out what we do know about refugee student education in Canada, our research team conducted a scoping review of Canadian academic literature and educational policy between 1997 and 2017. We identified and analyzed 59 relevant sources published in the last 20 years, focusing on refugee children, immigrant children, aggregated participant groups, newcomer youth, asylum seekers, and English language learners. Dragana Kovačević, one of our research team members, is passionate about refugee student education and well-being. She came to Canada in 1997 at the age of 5 as a refugee from the former Yugoslavia with world vision. When Dragana began school, she felt alone and isolated, mostly due to language barrier, but also because of the lack of support she received from her peers and her teachers. She felt excluded, left to sink or swim. Although Dragana received emotional and financial support from her parents were not actively involved in Dragana's schooling. They were unable to speak to Dragana's teachers or help her with homework because of the language barrier. They also worked long hours, were stressed about job insecurity, and were busy raising 2 children. As Dragana gained competency in English, she began translating for her parents, helping them with work emergencies, service provider calls, conversations with neighbors, and the Canadian citizenship test. Dragana learned from her parents that hard work pays off. In 2016, she completed a master's degree in education at Brock University. Social challenges that we discovered in the literature included a lack of peer support, including loss of pre-exile friendships, post-exile exclusion, bullying, and rejection. A lack of family support due to family stressors that often included babysitting, cooking, cleaning, and translating for parents. Older age at arrival also increases social challenges. Psychological challenges included a lack of trust due to peer and teacher negative attitudes towards refugees, identity crisis and a lack of belonging due to loss of pre-exile identity and culture, unknown triggers, including post-traumatic stress disorder, stolen youth, and misdiagnosed intellectual abilities of refugee students. Students are more likely to feel comfortable approaching teachers when they feel a sense of belonging. Recruiting refugee teachers in Canada's public schools could enhance educational experiences and achievements of refugee children. Internationally educated teachers act as critical cultural mediators and have the potential to become agents of change in schools and communities. School-based prevention programs offer a venue for fostering solidarity, tolerance, and resilience, as well as alternative to health services often underused by refugee youth. These prevention programs use creative arts to promote the creation of a playful atmosphere, to encourage respectful negotiations among peers, and to create connections among students as well as between the students and the teacher. Such connections can compensate for the loss of social and family networks, fostering refugee students' learning and integration. Refugee students do benefit from information provided in their native languages and in diverse formats and locations. Cross-cultural transformative leadership can be a powerful strategy in integrating refugee students in Canadian schools and society. SHIELD has adopted transformative leadership to specifically target newcomer refugees in North American schools. The model urges teachers to gain cultural competences and recognize that systematic discrimination and marginalization exist in schools. When making pedagogical decisions, teachers must ask themselves the following questions: who benefits and who is disadvantaged? Who is included and who is excluded? Who is privileged and who is marginalized? Who is legitimated and who is devalued? To whom are we listening and who are we not hearing? What data are we using for our decision making? The transformative cross-cultural leadership approach challenges deficit perspectives of refugee students by ensuring that students' voices are heard.
Educational leadership has an important responsibility to ensuring that refugee students are provided the proper support to thrive in the classroom and beyond. It's important that the unique challenges faced by refugee students are recognized and addressed through holistic, cross-cultural, and a multi-sector approach. Currently, minimal instructional resources exist for teachers and teacher candidates working with refugee students in the classroom. This gap can be addressed by providing professional development opportunities for teachers and teacher candidates, as well as working with collaborative multi-level settlement agencies and programs for refugee families, and developing cross-sector partnerships with government agencies working with refugees, as well as educational institutions. There's also an important opportunity in supporting refugee teachers who can act as critical cultural brokers and provide a role model for refugee students and their families as they navigate their new lives in Canada. Provincial variances in available resources for policy development and resources for stakeholders, teachers, and administrators show the need for cross-sector collaboration. Collaboration between federal government, provincial governments, local school divisions, service providers, and leadership in local schools is necessary to ensure refugee students' well-being in Canada. Also, effective strategies developed to support refugee students can also serve other marginalized populations in Canada, such as Indigenous students, racialized students, or students living in poverty.
Education must become more inclusive, anti-racist, and pro-diversity in course content and professional practice. White supremacy and othering must be challenged in the classroom because these biases perpetuate institutional racism in schools. Tutoring and participating in extracurricular activities are important for academic success and for building social inclusion. Flexible schedules across the day and childcare would also enhance refugee youth access to education. Bilingual education helps children value each other's knowledge and experience, leading to respect and collaboration. Such education helps refugee children stay connected with their parents and relatives, feel safe, and feel accepted. Additional teaching strategies include stage-wise progression, scaffolding, differentiated instruction, and deep professional development. The anxiety that many teachers may feel when first introduced to non-English speaking students in their classroom are often replaced with respect for how quickly refugees can learn and succeed in social interaction and academic work.
Some of the common themes that seemed promising when approaching working with refugee students were approaching refugee students from an assets perspective. So a good example of this is Saskatchewan's repository, which they titled Nurturing Resilience. So right there from the outset, they've set up their title to showcase that they are working from an assets perspective. They're nurturing resilience. We obviously encourage educators, policymakers, researchers to use an assets approach when working with students and to see the talents that students bring rather than just focusing on the challenges, the gaps, what they're missing.
There's a gap in literature and policy pertaining to refugee students in the Canadian educational system, and limited studies focusing on refugee children from conflict areas and their transition to Canadian schools. This gap demonstrates a need for further research, in particular longitudinal studies, to advance knowledge and resettlement and its impact on refugee children's psychological, educational, and social well-being. Further research is needed to better understand the strategies and methods that teachers currently use, as well as policymakers and the community, to smoothen the transition of refugee students as they enter Canadian schools and become part of the Canadian fabric. It is also important that we learn more from the parents of refugee students on the barriers they face in order to effectively create reflexive and holistic policies and practices towards refugee students. These can inform practice and policy. Beyond the Canadian context, there's also an opportunity for transnational collaboration and comparative research on refugee students' education in schools. There's a lot to learn, and together we can enact meaningful change.